Hi everyone, it's Rachel, and in this video I'll be talking you through exactly how I go about making my kawaii faces using polymer clay. Of course there are also other methods like painting on a face, but this particular video is going to address how I make them out of clay. So for this tutorial I'll be demonstrating all my kawaii faces on these star charms. The first thing to do when planning to make a kawaii face is the colour you'll be using. The main colour I personally use is this brown by Fimo, and this colour is called Caramel. I like using this colour of face particularly on my more pastel themed charms because it's more of a softer colour compared to if I use something like black, for example. The other colour I also like to use is black, and the black I have is by the brand Sculpey. I only ever decide to use black clay for the face if it suits the charm better so that it's more easily visible, for example on brown clay, red clay, or on a design that is very busy and I need the face to stand out more, then I will use black clay rather than the caramel brown clay. The other colour I make my kawaii faces out of is white, which I mainly use on darker creations like black, navy, or dark brown, and this helps to keep the face clearly visible. Now moving on to making the actual face, so I always position my face in the lower half of the charm, unless of course the design doesn't allow me to, then I have to make it higher. So the tools I always use when making my kawaii faces is of course the small pieces of polymer clay, my clay blade, a dotting tool, and I'll talk more about the different sizes in a moment, and then also a needle tool. Some of the more optional tools that I only use occasionally include my silicone clay shaper tool, which I got from Michaels, and also a small paintbrush if I'm wanting to dust on the cheeks. So I begin making my kawaii faces by starting with the eyes, and I have two different methods of making these, and I'll explain each of them in detail. Firstly, for both designs, I make indents with my dotting tool where I want to position the eyes. So this is where the different sizes of dotting tools come into play, and you'll need to take into account the size of your creation before selecting your dotting tool. If you have a very small charm, you'll want a smaller tool because if you select a large one, half the design will be made up with just the eyes and it won't look right. Same goes if your creation is larger. If you choose the smallest dotting tool, the face will be too small and again it won't fit the charm properly, so you really need to find the happy medium, not too big but not too small. The other thing I want to mention is how far apart you make the eyes. So if they're too close, it will make everything seem very crammed on, but then if they're too far apart, there will be too much free space and it just won't look very kawaii. Now that I've explained all of that, so what I do is I gently push my chosen dotting tool into the clay until the little ball on the end is about halfway into the clay. Method number one for making the eyes is to make them more 3D. So roll out the clay for the face into a snake, and as you can see I'm working with the colour Caramel by Fimo. I usually try to make the snake the same width as the dotting tool that I just used to help me estimate the size of the eyes. Once I've rolled it out, I then take my blade and trim off the very end scrap part, and then I make an estimation of how much clay I'm going to need, and I cut off 2 even sections. Once I have these pieces, I roll each of them between my fingers to create a little round ball. I then simply pop these into the indents I made using my finger. If it looks like you have too much or too little clay for what you would like, you can then easily roll the eyes back out and adjust the amount if you need to. Method number 2 that I sometimes use is making indented eyes. So again, I've made spots in the clay where I would like the eyes to go. I rolled out my chosen clay again, but this time I made the snake thinner, and this is because for this design we want less clay rather than more. I trimmed off 2 even sections, rolled them into balls, and then I placed these in the indents, and as you can see, these pieces are a lot smaller than the last design. Now you'll want to take the same dotting tool that you used to create those original indents and then just gently push the balls of clay we just put in there so that it fills up the space. Now moving on to what I believe most people have the most trouble with is the mouth. So begin by taking the same colour of polymer clay as you used for the eyes. You want to make sure that the clay is well conditioned and nice and soft because it will make the process so much easier and you won't have to worry about it crumbling as you try to work with it. As some of you may know, I work on glass when crafting with polymer clay, but particularly in hot weather it can become quite slippery from the heat in my hands when rolling clay, so I end up losing a lot of friction. One of the best surfaces I have found to roll really thin pieces of clay on is actually just a plain piece of paper, and this is because it's grainy, so it does have a lot of friction. I generally take a small scrap piece of paper and begin rolling my clay onto it. At the beginning, you want to kind of push down as you roll to make it thinner, but as it does get smaller, you want to be very gentle with it and more just glide the clay back and forth rather than pushing down on it. You'll find that one section will start to get thinner than the rest, so that's the part that you want to focus on, and if you like, you can cut away the excess so that you can roll it more easily. To help make the clay thinner, you can also hold one end with your finger and then kind of roll and pull the other end with another finger. You may find that some coils start to break off once it gets really small. Once I find a piece which is my ideal thickness for the certain charm I'm making, I then identify a section that I plan on using for the mouth and cut it off with my blade, and this piece is usually around 1 centimeter long. Then what happens is that the piece of clay then sticks to my blade, like you can see here, and this is where I shape it into the mouth. All I do is use my finger to gently push on the clay, and this curves it into the small U shape that I have for my mouth. At this point, I then take my needle tool and take it off the blade, and then the clay then sticks to my needle tool instead. From here, all I do is then very gently tap on the mouth where I want it between the eyes, not too high but not too low, and it usually comes off and sticks to the clay. If I do need to reshape or reposition the mouth, I will then very carefully do so using my needle tool. Of course, there are also lots of other little features that you can add to your face, like eyebrows or like a little tongue, for example, but the other feature I always usually include are some little cheeks, and I have 2 different methods of making these. Method number 1 includes dusting on some colour from a pink chalk pastel. Chalk pastels, or soft pastels as they're sometimes called, can be found in a set like this from your nearest craft store. I take the pink that I want to use, as well as a very thin paintbrush. I pick up the colour by rubbing my paintbrush onto the pastel, and then I gently pat it beside each of the eyes. I use this method of making cheeks when I'm working with lighter colours of clay so that it can be seen, but if I am working with darker colours, I will use method number 2. So this includes taking some light pink polymer clay, and I usually use this colour called Rose by Fimo. Like when making the eyes, I roll the clay into a tiny little coil. I trim off 2 even sections, and then I roll each of these sections into balls. I then simply position them beside each eye, either using my finger or one of my clay tools, and then I also very gently pat them down to make sure that they're attached. And there you have it. That is how I make my kawaii faces using polymer clay. I'm so sorry that this video did end up being much longer than expected, but I really wanted to go into every detail to make sure that everyone watching could learn at least one new thing. So if you did enjoy this video, please give it a big thumbs up. Don't forget to subscribe to my channel for more, and I'll see you next time. Bye guys!